Okay, welcome back. So, in this video, we will be looking at how to essentially just store information that we've had from a text file into an array. So, we are literally looking at how to read information from a text file and also to append that same information into a text file. So in the previous lesson, we looked at how to read from a text file, and we also looked at how to assign, sort of values or variables to particular values or information within a text file. So let's just go back to that, right? So this is what we did, right? So we got the file, we got our ID, the name, the age, right? So this is what I mean when I say that we've read information from the text file, but we've also assigned that individual information its corresponding variables. So in this video, we will be looking at how to do a similar thing, but now we are going to be storing that information into uh, an array. So here we basically have just declared our arrays. So we have our arrays that are globally declared. So we have an array ID, we have an array age, and then we have an array names. All of these arrays, I just gave them 100 because 100 is you're not necessarily going to be having more than 100, so we just chose an arbitrary number so that we can put 100 as the limit to what our information or our database or the text that is within the text file, it cannot exceed that number. So we have arrays that are the length of 100. We have an array ID, array age, and then array names, right? So we've stored them globally, or we've declared them globally. So let's look at our main function. So in our main function, we have more variables. We have an integer ID, an integer age, an integer I, an integer sum, and then we also have double, and then we have an average. So let's just go back to our text file that we created. So this is the text file that we've created. So now what I want to do is I want to store these numbers, right? 5234, which is the ID. I want to store that in an array. I also want to store these names, John, Luke, Harry, and Tamsanga, into a names array. And then I also want to store 23, 21, 25, 22, which is the age, to the age array. So we are just storing these different elements into their corresponding arrays. So what our program now does is that it just takes these values 5234, which is the ID, and then it just stores that into the array ID, and then it just takes the names, stores that into the names ID, sorry, not the names ID, but stores it in the array names, and then it takes the age 23, 21, 25, 22, and then it stores that into the array age. So that's pretty basic, right? But what I also want to do is, since when you are being questioned this, or you come across a particular problem, or you're in an examination or whatever happens, they're not necessarily just going to ask you to append text file values into an array. What they are going to ask you to do more realistically is, well, yeah, append those elements into the array if you want to, but what we want you to do is we want you to take these elements, maybe say take the age, like 20, 23, 21, 25, 22, and we then want you to store that in an array, and then we want you to then calculate the average and the sum of these age variables. We want you to store that information and basically manipulate it so that you can get the total and also the average. So that's what our program is then also going to do. We are going to be obviously reading all of these different elements and then storing them in their corresponding arrays, but then we're also going to be doing some form of manipulation where we are going to then be looking at the age variables, and then we are going to be sort of calculating the total or the sum of all of them, and then also getting the average age. So if we go back to our main program, so we've declared the average. This is a double, and then we've declared a string called names, and then we obviously have the if stream, which is the input file stream. So there we have a file. So then we have file.open new file, so it's exactly the same file that we were looking at previously. So then we have our obvious if statement that checks if a file has been opened or not, and then we have the while loop. So if you guys have not watched the previous video, please go back to the previous video. I know it's a bit long, but it's because I basically put a lot of stuff into the previous video. I've combined using the getLine method also with this method when it comes to using the while loop to basically allow you to loop through the entire text file up until the text file has then come to an end. So just check out that video if you haven't done already. So looking at this video or looking at this program, we have incremented I. So initially I is 0 because we've just declared I, and the default value of I is just 0. But you will understand exactly why am I doing that in a split second. So what we have here is file ID, names, and then age, right? So the ID is going to be stored in this variable called ID. The names is going to be stored in not the names, but the names in our text file is going to be stored in the names variable, and then the age, which is in our text file, is going to be stored in the age variable. And so now what we've done is we've come down below and then we've incremented I. Reason being why we're incrementing I is because we are working with arrays. So what do I mean by that? So while loop, right, it's going to loop for the first time. When it loops for the first time, it's going to be at this line, right? It's going to be at this line. But then it's not necessarily at the end of the file because there is still more content to go. So then it's going to loop again, right? So now it's looping for the second time. But again, it's not at the end of the entire text file. So then it's going to loop for the third time. And then it's going to loop for the fourth time. When it loops for the fourth time, at that position, it is then going to realize that it is now at the end of the text file, and it is then going to close the text file, right? So if you're thinking of I, for the first loop, I is going to be 1, right? I is going to be 1. For the second loop, I is going to be 2. For the third loop, I is going to be 3. And then for the fourth loop, I is going to be 4. So if you look at the architecture of an array just it basically just stores information in contiguous memory locations. So the first element is going to be at index 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So I starts at 0. So what I'm saying now is array at index I or at position 1 should be equal to the ID. What is ID equal to? Well, ID is going to be equal to 5 at the first loop, right? So now array ID at the first index is now equals to 5, right? And then we do the exact same thing. Now we say array names at the first position, which is I, because I at this juncture is equals to 0, right? We're now saying that array names at the 0th index or at the first element should now be equals to names, right? So what is names again at the first loop? Names is equals to John. So that means that the first value or the first element in the array names is going to be equal to John. And then the same thing is going to happen with the array age, right? So we're now seeing array age I, which is equal to 0, which, in arrays, that's going to be the first element. It's not equals to age. So what is age at this position? Age is going to be 23. Sorry, 23, right? So age is 23. So the first value, the first element in the array age is going to be 23. Sorry, 23. So, but the thing is, right, this array or this loop is not going to loop once. It's going to loop how many times? It's going to loop 4 times, because we have 1, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4 lines. So it's going to be looping 4 times, right? So we've already appended those values into the arrays for the first loop, and then now we come down here below and we say that sum is equals to sum plus age, right? So whatever the value of age is, I want you to add that to sum, right? And then we come down below now, and then we basically output the array ID, and then we output the array names, and then we output the array age, right? And then we obviously leave, we create a new line character. And then we come down below, and we're now saying that average is equals to sum divided by, so this is called typecasting. What I've just done here is called typecasting. So I is initially an integer because I declared I as an integer. But by using typecasting, you can then change the data type of the variable through using typecasting. So I was initially declared as an integer value, but now what I'm saying is, because I'm trying to get the average value, and average, you cannot necessarily divide an integer with an integer and think that you're going to get the average, right? It won't give you a real number. When I say a real number, I mean it won't give you a value that has a decimal point. It will only give you a whole number. So which is why I had to typecast it as a double. And then obviously down below we then have our output, which says that the sum of all ages is sum, and then the average of all ages is, well, average. So let's look at how this thing actually compiles. So this is what we have. We have 5, 2, 3, 4, John, 23, Luke 21, Harry 25, Tom Simon 22, which is exactly identical to this text file, which is new file, right? But now what we went ahead and done is we said that the sum of all ages is 103, and then we went down below and said that the sum of all and said that the average, sorry, of all ages is 27, right? It's 27. But what I want you guys to notice here is that these arrays, right, the array ID, the array names, and the array age, all of them are parallel arrays. Why are they parallel arrays? They are parallel arrays because they have the exact same size, right? They have the exact same size, which means that you can easily manipulate these different arrays or get certain information, right? And say that, listen, right, if age is equals, if array age is equals to or is less than 22, right, I want you to then display that person's name, right? So we want to see if a person's age is below 22, we want to basically display their age. So the way that you can do that is, it's very simple, right? You can just use parallel arrays. So what's going to happen is it's going to come down here and say, whose age exactly is below 22? Well, it's Luke. So now it's going to be displaying Luke. So that's how you can use parallel arrays in such a context, or in such situations where you've already stored the elements of a text file into an array, and now you have parallel arrays which you can use to manipulate the values or manipulate the data however way that you would want to.